Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are going to continue on with our boot camp lectures, and we're going to move now. We've been really focusing on space, so thinking about geometries and rectifications, and now as we're going to move into talking about image products, we're going to start to think about time. This is really the jumping off point for where now we're able to measure things quantitatively in meters or units we understand, and now we want to be able to start to do some science with our coastal imaging. So we're going to focus on a number of typical data products that we produce from imaging stations. Those include a snapshot, a time exposure image, or a time average. We're going to look at the variance of an image, and then the brightest and darkest images, and I'll explain those more in a little bit, and then also start to talk about pixel time stacks, so actually sampling the image to allow us to look at waves and currents. So some take-home points are that we can use time series of images to produce useful information that we can actually use for doing our science. We're not going to talk about it in this lecture, but the Pixel Toolbox is a useful toolbox to use when you're actually using pixel time stacks in an actual experiment. Right now, we're kind of using a demo version of that. That's a little bit more simple, but you might want or need to go to the more complicated Pixel Toolbox once you start really exploring pixel time series. And then a lot of these pixel image products and pixel time stacks that we're going to talk about can be processed using other more advanced CIRN toolboxes, and we'll talk about some of those toolboxes tomorrow, but there's a lot that's there on our repository that we're not even going to get to. So just keep that in mind, that there's much more that you can do here that we're not able to get to in this short bootcamp time period we have. So now that we're sampling in time, you can think about your image. We've been mostly focused on one image, so the U and V coordinates, but now we're adding this third dimension, not RGB, but in this case, third dimension is time. For typical sampling that we're doing at a coastal imaging station, we're often interested in collecting 2 Hz data. That's because we're looking at waves on the ocean. For many of the image products, we're sampling over 10 minutes, and we're doing that to average over waves. But sometimes when we're collecting pixel time series, we want to sample longer, maybe for 17 minutes. That would be a very typical sampling scheme with your ADCP or pressure sensor. So we would do the same thing with our images, but maybe you're interested in very low frequency waves, and then you might want to have a longer time series that you're sampling. We collect our images in oblique view, but then we rectify them so we can work in meters. And in time, we're going to do some things like calculating the mean, the standard deviation, the minimum, and the maximum pixel intensity. And you'll see how that plays out in a second. So this video shows on your left a rectified view from a UAS here at the FRF. And then on the right side, we're building up a time average image. So I think this video will replay itself. But you can actually watch how, oh, no, it will not. So starting from the first frame, you'll see initially we start with 1 frame in the average on the right, and we're going to continue to average through time, and you can see how that time X is built up. So there you go. You can see how as waves are coming in, you're averaging over the waves, and you start to build this picture showing where the waves are breaking over the sandbar. And so that's really what we're doing in real time when we produce a Timex image or in post-processing. So digging into the different types of image products that we produce and work with, this is a snapshot. It's the simplest product we use, and it's usually the first frame of a video that we collect. You can think of it as an instantaneous look at the surf zone, and you can start to see some things that I think Kate talked about in some of our earlier lectures, where you've got the dark front face of the wave and the brighter back face of the wave. But then when the wave breaks, you have a bright white front face and a slightly darker back. You can see waves coming into the shore at various angles. And we can take that and rectify it. So this is the rectified view here from the FRF. Again, you can see things like wave angles and wave lengths. You can see whether or not Snell's law is working as the waves approach shore. You can see information about the instantaneous breaking patterns from the snapshot. A couple of things you can start to look out at if you look really carefully is it looks like we might have some geometry errors, and that's because maybe we have spots where the waves are breaking, but it's not lining up with the other images from other cameras. So that might be an indication that maybe our geometries aren't perfect here. And then you can get a sense of pixel resolution. So as you move, I'm not exactly sure what resolution this is rectified at, but better resolution close to the shore. And then as you move offshore, you can get a sense that it looks a little blurry. Maybe we're oversampling with our rectification there. The next image that we're going to talk about is the time exposure or time average image. This shows what is constant in the image, and it historically was a really important image because it revealed information about the morphology on the beach. We have a number of toolboxes that extract quantitative information from the Timex image. And some of the things you can see here, this is an image that was taken in Palm Beach, just north of Sydney, which is a really kind of iconic beach and known for its interesting sandbar and rip current patterns. So there's the sandbar located offshore. There's some transverse bars here. You can see where the shoreline is, the shore break. That can be a useful piece of information if you want to track the shoreline over time. And there you can see a bathymetric rip channel. So that led to some interesting studies of rip channels here at this beach. Another image that we don't use quite as much as the time exposure image, but also can provide us with useful information, is the variance image. This shows you where pixel intensity is changing in the image. We call it the variance image, but it's actually the standard deviation. I don't really know why that is. Maybe Rob can tell us.
It's easier to say.
Okay. And it was originally used to find the shore break on a bright beach. Something that's interesting is in the middle of the shore break, it's not changing, and so that appears as a bright streak. So where things are constant. And it can be affected by changing illumination. So like Brittany mentioned, if you have a partly cloudy day where clouds are coming in, over or passing the sun, you might see some variability due to that, or perhaps you have a waving tree in your field of view that will light up. Here's another unique and useful image. This is the brightest image. So you're taking the maximum intensity at each pixel location in the image over 10 minutes. And you start to pick out some interesting things here when you do that. You can see what's the outer edge of the surf zone. You can see where's the highest swash on the beach. So for many of us wanting to know the total water level at the shoreline, this is a potentially useful piece of information that we can get out of the brightest image. And then right here, something that's kind of cool is a surfer walking with a yellow surfboard and spinning around in a circle. And you can see that this image was compiled from a series of images collected at 2 hertz. So you can see where that surfer was every half second. Another potentially useful piece of image product is the darkest image. So here we're taking the minimum intensity value at each pixel in the image over a period of 10 minutes. This can be used to remove breaking waves. So if you want to get a glimpse through the breaking waves to the seafloor, this is the way you can actually do it. And there are cases where you can actually see bed forms moving on the seafloor by looking at the darkest image. Here's some other features. You can see the maximum rundown on the beach. You can see where somebody's walking up and down the pier. So every half second, you can see where they were. And then somebody walking along the maximum run up. So if you think about where you walk when you go for a walk on the beach, you probably want to keep your feet dry. So there's lots of of different ways you can process your 10-minute time series. You could look at the highest 98% or the sort of 2% exceedance of brightness. You could do some band passing of your images, and you can look at wave averaged movies. So do short averaging, not 10 minutes, but enough to average out the waves, and look at things like currents. And you'll see a talk this week about that. And then, you can also just get some interesting views by building composite images. Here you can see the dark front face of the wave as it's starting to break. And of course, when you're looking at the extremes in the image, you might get things that are noisy compared to when you're seeing the time averaged image. Okay, so now we're going to jump to some of the toolbox. And so we're now down here on part G. We're going to produce image products. I think we're going to do this, Brittany. I'm going to need your help here in a minute. We're going to do this both for the UAS and a multi-camera system.
I think we're going to just do the UAS and then we'll do multi-camera all together.
Okay. All right. So let's see.
Was the Pixel toolbox in the like zip folder?
It is not. That's on the CIRN repository, so you can go and pull it yourself.
Are we? I think we decided we were just going to do UAS. Okay.
Oh, there's more. Should I keep going with?
I think let's do this one, the image products first, and then we'll go. I think this is the next lecture, the time series.
Okay.
Yes, this one is actually split in two. Yes. Okay, so we're going to be at G1. So essentially this one's there's not really much to play with. I'll ask, you don't even have to do 2 on this one. So basically what this one does is it's going to go into all your images and it's going to rectify them. Now you can have this option where it's going to output them. If you want to output every single individual image, rectification, you can. If you're just interested in your products, let's say you're running a remote station and you're processing on your machine and you want to send it over and you just want to send the Timex, you can just save those as well. So we just kind of gave that option. So I'll admit this. So this one takes a second because you're rectifying all these images. But trying to go through some things that, again, we point it for a UAS, we're going to point it to our variable function that we got from F and E. So again, it's going to have, basically it's going to have a vector for each individual frame, an extrinsic vector for each individual frame. And then we're going to point to where our obliques are stored. And then the grid that we want to resolve to do it at. So that grid that we were playing around with, like once we decide on one, we point to it here. And then this is if you want to output it in local or world coordinates or your geographical coordinates. So here again, this will kind of, this will be more for the fixed station because we have a variable solution and we already baked time into our file. We don't have to specify time, but if we had, if we were just giving it like a series of photos that had no reference of time, you could enter your time in here. And then again, this is the same with the elevation. So let's say if you knew you had 10 photos and you need the tide for each photo, you would put that variable elevation right here. And then we'll go through that when we do the multi-camera because that's a fixed one right there. And so I will go ahead. And I will hit run. So basically there's 40 frames and it's just gonna go through them. Process. So here we get, it's gonna output all of our products. So here is our brightest image. And then let me see if I can get this a little bit smarter. Here's our Timex image, brightest, and darkest right there. And then I said to output, and I specified where to save it. So we also have it over here. So if I like open it outside MATLAB, let me find it. First, let me show where it is. You go to Show in Explorer. Here's our movie. So again, you can kind of see our SCP solution. Wasn't amazing. We have a little jitter. Generally, it kind of depends on what your wave frequencies are. Something like CBAThy, like a small jitter, it can usually filter that out. But again, you don't want those big errors affecting your wavelengths and things like that. So that was the quick image product run through. I will go back to you, Meg.
Is it? Yeah.
So is the bright versus dark, the bright is just your highest exposure in each image, or is it the highest exposure images?
It's a composite of the highest exposure pixel across for each one. Yes, another.
Yes, you're right here. Okay, cool.
All right, so now we're going to move on to pixel tools and time series. So some variables we might want to look at, usually having to do with waves or currents. We want to sample through time. We look to pixel time series because if we sample our full frame through time, we'll suddenly start to get a lot of data. Perhaps not enough, perhaps so much that it's difficult to send it remotely back to wherever it is you're storing your data. And so that's why we want to do this downsampling. And we can do this in kind of smart ways to make different measurements. Some of the things that we might want to sample or that have been historically sampled are wave run-up, currents, waves, and other derived products like bathymetry estimated from wave speed and direction. So this is an example of a typical time stack. The way we would sample a time stack, so we have a cross-shore transect of pixels that we're sampling through time. And so when you map that out, you end up with what we call a time stack. People call it other things like the Graham-Muller diagram. It's all the same thing. So this is distance going from offshore or onshore to offshore, and time moving down the vertical axis. So you can see the waves coming in from offshore, running up the beach. This is the dry beach here, and moving back offshore. And then you can also see the residual foam on top of the waves, and we're actually tracking the speed of the wave in the surface of the water. Another thing that we could do, and one of Rob's students took a look at this during his PhD, relating pressure sensor signal of a wave with image intensity. And so this is an example of having a submerged pressure sensor here at the FRF and sampling a pixel above that pressure sensor. And here you can get a sense of here's what the elevation looked like from the pressure sensor and relating that to image intensity. So we can start to process these signals the same way we would process a wave signal. And here's where really going for the gold here with sampling imagery, sampling that imagery using pixel tools. This is an example from the NSEX experiment back in 2003. Because it's very simple and easy to deploy pixels relative to putting instruments in the water, we can do lots of sampling of pixels. This is an example where we're sampling run-up, so that the edge of the water level on the beach. We're sampling alongshore currents using this array here. We call that a V-bar array, and we have a video currents toolbox in the CIRN repository that you can use to process those data. We're sampling directional wave spectra with those blue arrays there, and then we also have a CBAThy matrix, so sampling across an alongshore to produce a subsampled grid that we can do further analysis on. This is basically the same thing, but now looking at it in a rectified view. So again, the run-up time series here in red, the Seabathy matrices in blue, or I guess that, I don't know what that is, sort of a Seabathy, a proto-early Seabathy matrix, sampling for wave direction and period in yellow, and the alongshore currents in green. So a little bit more about run-up time stacks. Like I mentioned, it's a cross-shore array of pixels. We tend to measure them in a relatively dense way, or sample them in a relatively dense way. The pixel time stack should track the foreshore slope. So if you think of your foreshore slope and your wave running up and down there, that's what the elevation that you want to sample at. But in fact, a lot of times we assume z equals 0 when we're doing a long time series where we know that the beach is going to be changing due to tides and morphologic change. We might just sample at z equals 0 to make it easier at the outset, but then we actually need to do some post-processing to project that z equals 0 elevation back onto the elevation of the beach. And that's not such a problem if the waves are actually at z equals 0, but a lot of times we're most interested in the total water level during a storm when the water levels are elevated, and you can introduce significant errors into your run-up in total water level estimate if you don't account for that slope of the beach. And we do have code, which is not in the repository yet, but that does that back projection to avoid those errors. And the errors can be quite large, up to 1 meter or more, depending on how far up the beach the waves are running. This is an example of a V-bar time stack, so a longshore current time stack, and here they're densely packed pixels going in the alongshore direction. And you can see that in comparison to a number of in situ sensors for this experiment. I think it was called the surf zone optics experiment. And here you can see the cross-shore positions of all of these sampling arrays. And next we're going to look at a time series from these sampling arrays. So here is the same cross-shore locations I just showed you, and we're looking at the residual foam as waves are passing. So here's the alongshore dimension on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is time, so moving per time as we move down the image. You can see individual wave crests passing that alongshore array, and then you can see the residual foam on top. And that's really what we're trying to exploit when we look at, when we use the video currents toolbox. Some things that are kind of interesting here, you can see where we might have some alongshore currents happening here. So there's a southerly moving current. Here's a place where you can see the foam and diverging. So you can see that the velocity is the slope of the foam. You can see where there's some divergence in the surface velocity over a shoal. And here you can see some convergence that might be forcing a rip current. And again, this is all from the video currents toolbox, and here's the original reference to where that toolbox was developed. And then finally, an important sampling scheme for us is the Seabathy matrix. We use the Seabathy algorithm to estimate wave speed and direction, which we can then invert to estimate bathymetry using the linear dispersion relation. Rob is going to go into a lot of detail about this tomorrow, but now we'll just talk about the sampling scheme. So we're sampling at a cross-shore resolution of 5 meters and a longshore resolution of 10 meters. So this blue, the blue pixels there represent some of the sampling locations. It's actually higher resolution than that, but you can't really see it. If we plot them all, then the red dot is the actual analysis location, and Rob, again, will go into great detail about this tomorrow, and the green represents the region around that single analysis point where we're drawing the frequency wave number pairs from the wave data that we're getting from the images. So lots more on that tomorrow, but that gives you just a look into what a sampling scheme would look like for the Seabathy matrix. So now we're going to jump into the last part of the toolbox, and that's the part G2, the pixel instruments. And so you're going to make some of your own pixel instruments.
Yeah. So as Meg said, this one is kind of just a very simplified version, more for teaching purposes, not related to the pixel toolbox. So it's mostly just showing how to extract subsample rectification points.